The servants called her the Ghost. Tanith moved through the halls of Velmorin's great palace like a shadow, invisible to those who mattered, beneath the notice of those who ruled. She kept her head down. She kept her hands busy. She kept the thing inside her buried so deep that most days she could pretend it didn't exist at all. But some cages weren't meant to hold forever. When Alpha King Aldrich arrived at the Northern Estate for the Winter Summit, every maid scrambled for his attention. They preened. They positioned themselves in doorways and corridors, hoping to catch the eye of the most powerful wolf in the realm. A king so cold they said his heart had frozen the day his mother died. A king so beautiful that noble women wept when he passed them without a glance. Tanith didn't scramble. She didn't position herself anywhere. She simply worked, as she always did, hoping to remain unseen. But the king saw her anyway. He stopped directly in front of her, his gray eyes sweeping over her plain dress, her calloused hands, and her downcast face. And then he laughed. A single, cold, dismissive sound that made the other servants snicker. "This one," he said to the head steward. "I want her assigned to my chambers." The hall went silent. No one understood why a king who could command anyone would choose the servant everyone mocked. Tanith didn't understand either. Not until his true intentions became clear. And not until the power she'd spent her entire life suppressing decided it was done being ignored. Neither of them was prepared for what would awaken between them. The bucket slipped from Tanith's frozen fingers and clattered against the stone floor, dirty water splashing across her worn shoes. She scrambled to right it, her cheeks burning, but the damage was done. Laughter echoed through the servants' corridor. "Careful, Ghost," Mira called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You might actually make a sound for once." More laughter. Tanith said nothing. She never said anything. Words had stopped mattering years ago, around the same time she'd learned that silence was safer than speaking. That invisibility was a gift, not a curse. She mopped up the water with her already damp apron, ignoring the ache in her knees, the chill that had settled into her bones from another night sleeping in the unheated servants' quarters. Winter in Velmorin was merciless, and the northern estate sat high enough in the mountains that frost crept through every crack, every gap, and every poorly sealed window. "The king arrives within the hour," the head steward announced, striding past without looking at her. "Every surface must gleam, every fire must burn. Anyone who embarrasses this household will answer to me personally." Tanith worked faster. Her hands were red and raw, but she scrubbed until the stone shone. She polished until the brass fixtures reflected her pale, hollow face back at her. She built fires in 6 different hearths, carrying wood until her shoulders screamed. No one thanked her. No one noticed. That was the point. By the time the horn sounded announcing the king's arrival, Tanith had positioned herself exactly where she always positioned herself during important events, in the back, in the shadows, against the wall. The other servants jostled for better views, craning their necks toward the great entrance hall where Alpha King Aldrich would make his appearance. The doors opened. Cold air rushed in first, carrying the scent of pine and snow and something else. Something that made the wolf inside Tanith lift its head for the first time in years. Power. Raw, ancient, overwhelming power that rolled through the hall like thunder before a storm. And then she saw him. Aldrich of Velmoran was taller than the stories claimed. His hair was the color of a winter midnight, black with hints of deep blue where the torchlight caught it. His jaw could have been carved from the mountain stone itself, sharp and unforgiving. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from every person in that hall. Gray. Not the soft gray of morning mist, but the hard gray of steel, of glaciers, of something that had never known warmth and never wanted to. He walked through the assembled servants as if they were furniture. His gaze passed over the prettiest maids without a flicker of interest, over the bowing footmen without acknowledgement, over the head steward's elaborate welcome speech without showing any patience. He was nearly past Tanith's position when he stopped. She felt his attention land on her like a physical weight. Her wolf, dormant for so long she'd almost forgotten it existed, suddenly pressed against her ribs. And deeper still, in that place she never acknowledged, something else stirred. Something hot. Something dangerous. You. His voice was winter itself. Step forward. Tanith's legs moved before her mind could catch up. She found herself standing in front of him, head bowed, her pulse spiking so hard she was certain he could hear it. Look at me. She raised her eyes. The moment their gazes connected, she felt something crack inside her chest. A fissure in the wall she'd built around herself. Around the thing she could never let out. The king's lip curled. Not in cruelty exactly. In something closer to cold amusement. This is what the northern estate offers? He looked at the head steward, one dark eyebrow raised. A servant who trembles like a leaf and looks like she hasn't eaten a proper meal in months? Tanith's cheeks flamed. The other servants tittered. The head steward rushed to apologize, to offer other options, prettier options, more suitable options. But Aldrich raised one hand, silencing them all. No, he said, his gaze returning to Tanith. A change flickered across his expression. Something she couldn't read. This one. I want her assigned to my chambers for the duration of my stay. The hall went deathly quiet. Tanith's blood turned to ice. His chambers, the king's private quarters, where no servant went without explicit invitation, where rumors said he'd sent 3 different attendants running within days because they couldn't withstand his coldness, his demands, his complete and utter indifference to their existence. Your Majesty, the head steward stammered, surely someone more experienced. Did I ask for your opinion? The steward's mouth snapped shut. Aldrich looked at Tanith one final time, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Closer to the expression a wolf might wear before it devoured its prey. Report to my chambers at sundown, he said. Don't be late. Then he walked away, leaving Tanith standing frozen in the center of the hall, every eye upon her, every whisper rising around her like smoke. She didn't understand what had just happened. She didn't understand why he'd chosen her. But the thing inside her chest, the thing she'd suppressed for 15 years, had begun to pulse with a heat she couldn't ignore. And somewhere deep in her bones, she felt the first stirring of something that might have been destiny or might have been doom. The king's chambers occupied the entire eastern wing of the estate. Tanith had never been permitted past the gilded doors that separated his quarters from the rest of the house, but she'd heard the stories. Cold enough to freeze breath midair, dark enough to swallow light, filled with shadows that seemed to move on their own. She stood before those doors now, her hand raised to knock, her courage failing. He requested you specifically, she reminded herself. He could have chosen anyone. He chose you. But why? The question had tormented her through the remaining hours of daylight. She was nobody. Less than nobody. A servant without family, without pack, without even a proper surname. The northern estate had taken her in as a child after she'd been found wandering the forest, half dead from cold and something else. Something the healers couldn't name but learned to fear. She'd been 7 years old when the fires started. Tanith pushed the memory down, buried it beneath layers of practiced control, and knocked. Enter. The single word carried so much authority that her hand moved to the door handle without conscious thought. She stepped inside, and the cold hit her immediately. Not the natural cold of winter, but something deeper. Something that felt almost alive. The chamber was vast. A fire burned in a massive stone hearth, but it seemed to produce no warmth. Candles lined every surface, their flames flickering in a non-existent wind. And sitting in a chair before the fire, still dressed in his traveling clothes, was the king. He didn't turn as she entered. Didn't acknowledge her presence at all. Simply continued staring into the flames as if they held answers to questions only he could hear. Close the door. Tanith obeyed. You will tend this fire throughout the night, he said, still not looking at her. You will ensure it never dies. You will bring food when I require it, remove trays when I'm finished, and otherwise remain silent and invisible. Can you manage that? Yes, Your Majesty. Good. He paused. I chose you because the others would have attempted conversation, flirtation, pathetic bids for my attention. Now he turned, those gray eyes finding hers across the dim room. You won't do any of those things, will you? Tanith shook her head slowly. Because you know your place. She should have agreed, should have bowed her head and accepted the insult beneath his words. But something flickered in her chest, that dangerous heat again, and before she could stop herself, she spoke. Because I have no interest in your attention, Your Majesty. The silence that followed was absolute. Tanith's heartbeat stuttered. What had she done? What had possessed her to speak to the Alpha King that way? He could have her whipped, dismissed. Worse. But Aldrich didn't rage, didn't call for guards. Instead, his demeanor altered subtly. The cold amusement faded, replaced by something closer to curiosity. No interest, he repeated slowly. Every servant in this estate would sell their soul for 5 minutes of my attention. But you have no interest. No, Your Majesty. Why? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her why she felt anything. No one had ever cared enough to wonder. Because attention brings expectations, she heard herself say, and expectations bring disappointment. I've learned to want neither. Aldrich studied her for a long moment. The firelight cast strange shadows across his face, emphasizing the sharp angles, the hollow beneath his cheekbones, the darkness that seemed to live behind his eyes. Sit, he said finally, gesturing to a small stool near the hearth. You'll freeze standing there. Tanith blinked. Was the king showing her consideration? She sat, and the warmth of the fire, what little there was, seeped into her chilled bones. Aldrich returned his attention to the flames, and silence stretched between them. But it wasn't the oppressive silence she'd expected. It was almost comfortable. Minutes passed, perhaps an hour. Tanith tended the fire when it dipped, added logs when needed, and said nothing. The king also said nothing. But occasionally she felt his gaze on her, assessing, calculating. You're not afraid of me, he observed eventually. Should I be, Your Majesty? Everyone is afraid of me. Tanith considered this. Her wolf was restless tonight, more awake than it had been in years. And that other thing, the heat beneath her ribs, pulsed with increasing insistence. Perhaps I've known worse things than cold kings, she said quietly. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. For a moment she thought she saw something flicker in their gray depths. Recognition, maybe. Or understanding. But then his expression shuddered, and he rose from his chair with fluid grace. You'll sleep there, he said, gesturing to a small pallet near the fire. I expect the flames tended throughout the night. If I wake cold, you'll regret it. He disappeared through a door into what she assumed was his bedchamber, leaving Tanith alone with the fire and her racing thoughts. She curled onto the pallet, pulling the thin blanket around herself. The flames danced before her eyes, and she watched them with the practiced caution of someone who knew exactly how dangerous fire could be. Because fire listened to her. It always had. Ever since that night in the forest when she was 7 years old, terrified and alone, and so cold she thought she would die. She'd wished for warmth, and the trees had exploded into flame. 3 people had died that night. 3 wolves from the pack that had been chasing her, hunting her, trying to drag her back to the place she'd escaped. Tanith had buried that memory so deep, she rarely let herself think of it. But tonight, in the king's chambers, with his strange cold pressing against her, and that heat in her chest growing stronger, she couldn't stop the images from surfacing. Fire, screaming, the smell of burning flesh, and her, standing in the center of it all, untouched by flames that should have consumed her. The fire in the hearth suddenly flared, sparks shooting upward, flames leaping higher. Tanith gasped and pulled back. forcing the heat inside her down, down, down into the locked place where it belonged. The flames settled. The room grew cold again. But in the doorway to his bedchamber, hidden in shadow, Aldrich stood watching. And though Tanith didn't know it, though she couldn't feel his gaze upon her, the king had seen everything. He had seen the fire respond to her fear. And for the first time in 15 years, the frozen thing inside his own chest cracked just slightly, because he recognized what she was, and he knew exactly why he'd chosen her. 3 days passed in a strange rhythm. Tanith tended the fire, brought meals, removed trays. Aldrich ignored her almost entirely, spending his hours in meetings with northern lords and his evenings staring into flames that never seemed to warm him. But on the 4th morning, everything changed. "The king requests your presence at breakfast," a footman informed her, his tone dripping with disdain. "In the great hall, with the other lords." Tanith's stomach dropped. There must be a mistake. No mistake. His Majesty was quite clear. You're to stand behind his chair and attend to his needs throughout the meal. The footman's lip curled. Though why he'd want a creature like you representing his household is beyond comprehension. She wanted to refuse. Everything in her screamed to refuse. The great hall meant visibility, meant the eyes of every noble, every servant, and every person who had ever mocked her or dismissed her or whispered about the strange ghost girl who never spoke. But one did not refuse the Alpha King. The great hall was already full when she arrived. Lords and ladies sat at long tables, their finery glittering in the morning light that streamed through tall windows. Servants moved between them, pouring wine, offering bread, anticipating needs before they were spoken. And at the head table, raised on a dais above the rest, sat Aldrich. He looked different in daylight. Somehow more real, more present. His dark hair was pulled back from his face, revealing the full severity of his features. His black clothing absorbed light rather than reflecting it. And his eyes, when they found her across the crowded room, held that same unreadable intensity she'd seen that first night. He gestured her forward. Every step felt like walking through water. She could feel the stares, the whispers starting, the cruel curiosity of people who couldn't understand why the ghost girl was ascending the king's dais. "Your Majesty," she murmured, taking her position behind his chair. Aldrich didn't respond, didn't need to. His attention returned to the lord beside him, some trade negotiation she couldn't follow and didn't try to. For a while, nothing happened. Tanith stood still, head bowed, hands clasped, doing her best to fade into the background. The lords talked, the ladies gossiped, servants came and went. Then Lady Sereni arrived. Tanith recognized her immediately. Everyone in the northern estate knew Lady Serena, the most beautiful Omega in the region, daughter of Lord Krezik, and widely assumed to be the king's future bride. She was golden and perfect, with hair like spun honey and eyes the color of summer skies. She moved through the world expecting it to part for her, and it always did. "Your Majesty," Serene purred, approaching the dais with a graceful curtsy. "I do hope you're finding our estate to your satisfaction." "It serves its purpose," Aldrich replied without warmth. Serene's smile never faltered. "And I see you've acquired a new attendant." Her gaze slid to Tanith, and something ugly flickered beneath the sweetness. "How charitable of you to employ the less fortunate." Tanith kept her eyes down, her face blank, her hands steady. "Though I must say," Serene continued, her voice carrying deliberately across the hall, "I'm surprised you'd allow such a creature near your person. The servants say she's touched. Strange, that she talks to fires and makes them answer." Laughter rippled through the hall. Tanith's cheeks burned, but she didn't move, didn't react. "They say she was found in the forest as a child," Serene pressed on, clearly enjoying herself. "Covered in ash, surrounded by bodies. Some believe she's cursed. Others think she's simply mad." She tilted her golden head, mock sympathy dripping from every word. "Perhaps she's both." The laughter grew louder. Something hot shifted in Tanith's chest. The dangerous thing. The thing she couldn't control when emotions ran too high. She could feel it pressing against her ribs, responding to her humiliation, her anger, her desperate desire to disappear. The candles on the nearest table flickered violently. Enough. Aldrich's voice cut through the laughter like a blade through silk. Cold. Final. Absolute. The hall went silent. Lady Seren. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. You presume to mock a member of my personal household? Sereni's smile faltered. Your Majesty, You merely displayed the kind of cruelty that reveals far more about your character than hers. Aldrich rose slowly from his chair, and the temperature in the hall seemed to plummet. This woman has served me with more dignity and competence in 4 days than your household staff has managed in 4 generations. If I hear another word of mockery directed at her, from anyone, the offender will answer to me personally. No one breathed. No one moved. Sereni's face had gone pale. Your Majesty, I apologize. I meant no. Leave. The single word was quiet, devastating, final. Seren fled the hall with whatever remained of her dignity. The other lords and ladies suddenly found their breakfast plates fascinating. And Tanith stood frozen behind the king's chair, unable to process what had just happened. He had defended her. The Alpha King, who cared for nothing and no one, had defended her. Later, after the hall had emptied and only the 2 of them remained, Aldrich turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes had changed. You should have said something, he told her. Should have defended yourself. Would words have changed anything, Your Majesty? Perhaps not. He studied her face in the morning light, his gaze lingering on features she'd always considered plain, forgettable. But you're not what they say, are you? Tanith's blood rushed in her ears. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. He stepped closer, and the cold that always surrounded him washed over her like a wave. I think you know exactly what you are, and I think you've spent your entire life hiding it. The heat in her chest surged. The candles on every table in the hall suddenly flared, flames leaping twice their normal height. Tanith gasped, desperately pushing the power down, forcing it back into its cage. The flames settled. The room grew still. But Aldrich had seen. His gray eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her wolf whimper and that deeper, more dangerous part of her want to answer. Interesting, he murmured. Very interesting. Then he walked away, leaving Tanith alone in the empty hall, her secret no longer quite as secret as she'd believed. And somewhere deep inside her, the thing she'd suppressed for 15 years began to stretch its limbs, testing the walls of its prison. Waiting for the moment when it would finally break free. The days that followed settled into a new pattern. Tanith still tended the king's chambers, still fed his fire through endless cold nights, but something had shifted between them. A wall had cracked, not fallen. Aldrich was far too guarded for that, but cracked just enough for her to glimpse what lay beneath. He spoke to her now. Not often, not warmly, but in those quiet hours before dawn, when the estate slept and only the 2 of them remained awake, he would sometimes break the silence. You never ask questions, he observed one night, his gaze fixed on the flames she'd just stoked. Every other servant I've ever had couldn't stop talking, couldn't stop trying to learn my secrets, curry my favor, and position themselves for advancement. Tanith added another log to the fire, watching the sparks spiral upward. I have no interest in advancement, Your Majesty. So you've said. He turned his head slightly, studying her profile in the firelight. But surely you must wonder. Why I chose you. Why I defended you against Lady Serene. Why I keep you here when I could have anyone. She did wonder. Every moment of every day she wondered. But admitting that felt dangerous, like exposing a vulnerability she couldn't afford to reveal. Your Majesty's reasons are his own. And if I told you my reasons were far from noble? Something in his voice made her look up. His gray eyes held hers across the dim room, and for a moment, the mask slipped. She saw exhaustion there, pain, a bone-deep weariness that seemed to go beyond mere tiredness. "Then I would say that unnoble reasons are still reasons," she replied quietly, "and that perhaps your majesty carries burdens heavier than anyone knows." Aldrich's expression fractured. For just an instant, he looked almost young, almost vulnerable. Then the mask returned, and he rose from his chair with his usual fluid grace. "You see too much," he said. "It's a dangerous quality in a servant." "Shall I learn to see less, your majesty?" The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Not cruel this time, almost genuine. "No," he said. "I find I prefer the danger." He retired to his bedchamber, and Tanith was left with a heart that beat too fast and a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. The following evening brought an unexpected summons. "The king requests your presence at the winter ball," the head steward announced, looking as though the words physically pained him. "You are to attend him throughout the event." Tanith's stomach dropped. "The ball? But I don't have... Arrangements have been made." The steward thrust a bundle of fabric into her arms. "You'll find appropriate attire in your quarters. His Majesty expects you in the Great Hall at sundown." The dress was nothing like anything Tanith had ever worn. Deep crimson silk that seemed to shimmer with inner fire. Long sleeves that would hide the scars on her arms. A modest neckline that still somehow made her feel exposed. When she looked in the small mirror in her quarters, she barely recognized herself. The Great Hall had been transformed for the occasion. Thousands of candles cast golden light across polished floors. Musicians played in a corner alcove. Lords and ladies swirled in elaborate dances, their gowns and doublets creating a kaleidoscope of color and movement. And at the center of it all, seated on a throne-like chair on the dais, was Aldrich. He wore black, as always. But tonight the fabric was threaded with silver that caught the candlelight like captured stars. His dark hair fell loose around his shoulders, and the severity of his features seemed somehow softer in the warm glow. When he saw her approaching, a crack appeared in his composure. His eyes swept over the crimson dress, lingered on her face, and for just a moment, his careful control slipped. "You came," he said as she took her position beside his chair. "Did your Majesty think I wouldn't?" "I thought you might flee." His voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Most people do, eventually." Before Tanith could respond, Lady Sereni appeared. She was resplendent in pale blue silk, her golden hair adorned with sapphires, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Your Majesty," she purred, executing a perfect curtsy. "Surely you'll honor me with a dance. The musicians have prepared a traditional Velmoran waltz, especially for the occasion." The lords and ladies nearby fell silent, watching, waiting. Everyone knew that dancing with the king at the winter ball was tantamount to a declaration, an announcement of favor, of intention. Aldrich's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I don't dance, Lady Seren." "But your Majesty danced at the autumn celebration in the capital. I saw you myself, partnered with the Duchess of..." "I said I don't dance." The words were ice. Absolute. Final. Sereni's smile faltered, and something ugly flickered in her eyes before she could hide it. Her gaze slid to Tanith, standing quietly beside the king's chair, and hatred burned there, pure and unmistakable. "Of course, your Majesty." She curtsied again, retreating with whatever grace she could salvage. The music continued. The dancing resumed. But Tanith felt Sereni's gaze on her throughout the night, sharp and venomous. Hours later, when the ball had wound down and most guests had retired, Aldrich finally rose from his chair. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. They moved through empty corridors, past sleeping servants and guttering torches, until they reached a small balcony overlooking the estate's frozen gardens. The night was bitterly cold, but Aldrich stepped outside without hesitation. Tanith followed, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. "You're cold," he observed. "It's winter, your Majesty." "Yet you followed me anyway." He turned to face her, and the moonlight turned his gray eyes silver. Why? Because you asked me to. Most people wouldn't brave the cold simply because I asked. Perhaps I'm not most people. The air between them changed. Aldrich took a step closer, and despite the bitter temperature, despite everything she knew about keeping her distance, Tanith didn't retreat. No, he murmured. You're certainly not. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek. His touch was ice, colder than the winter night, colder than anything natural. And yet somehow, impossibly, it sent heat racing through her veins. The fire inside her surged forward. Aldrich gasped, his eyes widening. His hand jerked back as if burned, and he stared at his palm in something like shock. What? He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time, she saw fear in those glacier eyes. What are you? The candles in the corridor behind them exploded into flame. Every torch on the balcony roared to sudden, brilliant life. The air itself seemed to crackle with heat that shouldn't exist in the frozen night. Tanith stumbled backward, her hands raised, her chest tightening with panic. I'm sorry, she gasped. I didn't mean to. I can't always. But Aldrich wasn't moving toward her, wasn't calling for guards. He stood perfectly still, staring at his palm where her warmth had touched his frozen skin. And when he finally looked up, his expression was something she'd never seen before. Wonder. Desperate, aching wonder. You're warm, he whispered. You're actually warm. Then he turned and fled into the darkness, leaving Tanith alone on the balcony with flames dancing around her like loyal servants awaiting their queen's command. Aldrich avoided her for 3 days. Tanith continued her duties in his chambers, but he was never there. She tended the fire alone, slept on her pallet alone, and tried not to feel the absence like a physical wound. He knows what you are now, she told herself. He'll have you sent away. Or worse. But no guards came. No summons to the head steward. Nothing but silence and empty rooms and the endless, unnatural cold that seemed to seep deeper into the walls each day. On the 4th night, she woke to the sound of labored breathing. Tanith sat up on her pallet, her breath catching in her throat. The fire had burned low, too low, she realized with a jolt of fear. She'd fallen asleep. She'd let it die. And there, collapsed before the dying embers, was the king. Your Majesty! She scrambled across the floor, falling to her knees beside him. His skin was blue. Not pale, not cold. Blue, like a man who'd been buried in snow for hours. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, his body racked with shivers so violent they looked like convulsions. No, no, no. Tanith pressed her hands to his chest and felt nothing. No heartbeat, no warmth, nothing but ice beneath her palms. The power inside her exploded. Heat poured from her hands like liquid fire. The dying embers in the hearth roared back to life. The candles throughout the chamber burst into flame. The very air grew warm, then hot, then almost burning. And beneath her palms, Aldrich's heart stuttered back to life. She didn't know how long she knelt there, pouring heat into his frozen body. Minutes. Hours. Time ceased to have meaning. All that existed was the fire flowing from her into him, the desperate need to keep his heart beating, to keep the ice from claiming him completely. When his eyes finally opened, she was weeping. You're dying, she whispered. You're dying, and you didn't tell me. Aldrich stared up at her, his expression raw and unguarded in a way she'd never seen. I'm cursed, he said, his voice barely audible. Have been since birth. The cold lives inside me. It's been killing me slowly for 30 years. Why didn't you tell anyone? A bitter laugh scraped from his throat. I'm the Alpha King. I can't be weak, can't be dying, can't be anything other than cold and untouchable. Tanith's hands were still pressed against his chest. She could feel his heart now, beating faster, stronger, responding to her warmth in ways that seemed impossible. That's why you chose me, she realized. You knew what I was. You could feel it. I suspected. He raised one trembling hand and covered hers where it rested over his heart. I've searched for years for someone who could warm me. Healers, witches, fire elementals from distant kingdoms. Nothing worked. No one's fire could reach past the curse. But mine can? His eyes met hers, and the vulnerability there took her breath away. Yours is the only warmth I've felt in 30 years. His voice cracked. When you touched me on that balcony, I felt alive. For the first time in my entire existence, I actually felt alive. The confession hung between them, raw and devastating. Tanith looked down at this powerful king, this cold and untouchable man, and saw the truth beneath the mask. He wasn't cruel. He was dying. He wasn't indifferent. He was terrified. And somehow, impossibly, her fire was the only thing that could save him. "Let me help you," she whispered. "Please, let me—" He pulled her down before she could finish. The kiss was fire and ice, impossible contradictions that somehow made perfect sense. His lips were cold against hers, but she poured heat into the contact, felt him drink it in like a man dying of thirst. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, closer, as if he couldn't get enough of the warmth she offered. When they finally broke apart, they were both trembling. "I should send you away," Aldrich breathed. "You're too dangerous, too powerful. If anyone found out what you are, then don't send me away. The lords will never accept a servant as my—" "I don't care about the lords. Seren will try to destroy you. Let her try." Aldrich laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. "You're fearless. Or foolish. I can't decide which. Perhaps both." Tanith touched his face, marveling at the color that had returned to his cheeks. "But if my fire can save you, then nothing else matters. Not the lords, not Sereni, not what anyone thinks of the ghost girl who talks to flames." He kissed her again, softer this time, tender. When he pulled back, his gray eyes were bright with something she'd never seen there before. Hope. "Stay with me tonight," he said. "Not as my servant. Just stay." So she stayed. They lay together before the roaring fire, his arms wrapped around her, her heat seeping into his frozen bones. She told him about the night she was found in the forest, about the fire that had killed her pursuers, about 15 years of hiding what she was, terrified that someone would discover the monster inside her. "You're not a monster," Aldrich said fiercely. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever known." He told her about his mother, who had tried to warm him as a child, who had loved him fiercely despite his father's coldness, and who had died when he was only 5 under circumstances no one would explain. He told her about growing up cold and alone, learning to mask the pain with cruelty, pushing everyone away because getting close meant watching them freeze when they touched him. "I thought I would die alone," he admitted. "I made peace with it." "You won't die alone." Tanith pressed her palm over his heart, felt it beating strong and steady. "You won't die at all. Not if I can help it." They talked until dawn, sharing secrets neither had ever spoken aloud. When the first light crept through the windows, Tanith felt something she'd never experienced before. Belonging. This cold king, this frozen man, understood her in ways no one ever had. He didn't fear her fire. He needed it. And she needed his ice, his darkness, his willingness to see all of her and not look away. "The court will talk," Aldrich murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "They'll wonder why the king spends every night with a servant girl. Let them wonder. Sereni will spread rumors. Sereni can burn." He laughed again, that startled, genuine sound that made her heart soar. "I'm falling for you," he said quietly. "I didn't think it was possible. I thought the curse had frozen that part of me completely. But you—" "I know," Tanith whispered. "I'm falling too." He kissed her forehead, her eyelids, and her lips. The fire crackled happily in its hearth, responding to her contentment. And for the first time in 15 years, Tanith didn't try to suppress it. She let it burn. And somewhere deep inside her, the power that had been locked away for so long began to unfurl its wings, preparing for the day when it would finally be set free. 3 months passed like a beautiful dream. Tanith moved from her pallet by the fire to Aldrich's bed. No official announcement was made. They both knew the court wasn't ready for that. But the servants whispered, the lords speculated, and Lady Sereni watched with eyes that grew more venomous by the day. None of it touched them. In Aldrich's chambers, surrounded by warmth that Tanith's presence provided, they existed in their own world. She learned the geography of his body, every scar and shadow. He learned the landscape of her power, the way it responded to her emotions, the way it surged when she was happy and flickered when she was afraid. You could be so much more, he told her one night, tracing the lines of her palm as they lay tangled together. With proper training, proper guidance, you could be the most powerful fire wielder in centuries. I don't want power, Tanith replied. I just want this. Us. You have that. He pressed a kiss to her wrist. You'll always have that. But even as he spoke the words, something cold crept into the edge of his voice, a shadow she didn't understand. The curse, she would later realize, had not been defeated, only held at bay. The night everything changed began like any other. They dined together in his chambers, talking about nothing and everything. Aldrich's color was good, his strength restored. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked healthy, alive. I want to make this official, he said suddenly. Tanith paused with her wineglass halfway to her lips. Official? You and me, I want the court to know. I want everyone to know. His gray eyes were fierce with determination. I'm tired of hiding. Tired of pretending you're just a servant. You're so much more than that, Tanith. You're everything. Her heart soared even as fear crept in. The lords will never accept... I don't care about the lords. He stood crossing to kneel before her chair. I love you. I love your fire and your fearlessness and the way you see through every mask I've ever worn. I want you by my side, not behind my chair. I want you as my queen. The word hung in the air between them. Queen. Such an impossible word for a servant girl, a ghost, a creature that everyone had dismissed and mocked. Aldrich? Her voice broke. Say yes. He took her hands, pressed them to his lips. Say you'll be mine. Not just in private, not just in these chambers, in front of everyone, forever. The power in her chest responded to his words. It rose like a tide, warm and golden and overwhelming. She could feel it reaching for him, wrapping around him, binding them together in ways that went beyond physical touch. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll be yours, forever. Aldrich pulled her into his arms and the kiss was incandescent. Fire blazed through her veins and she didn't try to suppress it. She let it flow into him, let it warm every frozen corner of his cursed body. But something went wrong. Instead of absorbing her fire as he always did, Aldrich suddenly gasped. His body went rigid. Ice crystals began forming on his skin, spreading from his chest outward like cracks in frozen glass. Tanith. His voice was strangled. Something's happening. The curse was fighting back. She poured more fire into him, desperate to burn away the ice, but it only seemed to make things worse. The crystals spread faster. His lips turned blue. His eyes began to frost over. No, Tanith screamed. No, no, no. The power inside her exploded. Not the gentle warmth she'd learned to control. Not the careful heat she channeled into him each night. This was something else entirely. Raw, primal, terrifying. A supernova of flame that erupted from her core and consumed everything in its path. The curtains ignited, the furniture burst into flame, the windows shattered outward from the force of the heat. Every candle, every torch, every spark in the entire wing of the estate roared to impossible life. And Tanith stood at the center of it all, burning but not consumed, her eyes blazing gold, her hair floating around her like she was underwater. She heard screaming, distant voices, running footsteps, but all she could see was Aldrich, lying on the floor before her, the ice crystals finally receding from his skin as her fire drove them back. His eyes opened, and even through the inferno surrounding them, he stared at her with something that looked like awe. Then the doors burst open. Guards flooded in, followed by lords and servants and Lady Sereni, who took one look at the scene before her and smiled, a terrible, triumphant smile. "Witch," she breathed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The ghost girl is a witch." The flames died instantly, not because Tanith wanted them to, but because shock stole the power from her control. She collapsed to her knees, suddenly exhausted, suddenly terrified, suddenly aware of what she'd just revealed to the entire court. "She tried to kill the king!" Sereni's voice rose in false horror. "Guards, seize her!" "No!" Aldrich's voice cracked through the chaos. He struggled to his feet, placing himself between Tanith and the advancing guards. "No one touches her." "Your Majesty, she's dangerous." "I said no one touches her." His voice was ice, his authority absolute. "Anyone who lays a hand on her answers to me." The guards hesitated. The lords murmured uncertainly. Sereni's expression flickered with frustration, but Tanith could see the damage in everyone's eyes. They'd seen her power. They'd witnessed the uncontrollable fire that lived inside her. They knew what she was now, and no amount of royal protection could make them forget. "Leave us," Aldrich commanded. "All of you, now." They left, slowly, reluctantly, casting fearful glances over their shoulders. Sereni was the last to go, and the look she gave Tanith was pure poison. "This isn't over," her smile said. "I will destroy you." Then they were alone. Aldrich turned to face her, and Tanith braced herself for the fear, the revulsion, and the inevitable rejection. But instead, he crossed the ruined room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Are you all right?" he demanded. "Are you hurt? I almost killed you." The words came out broken. "The curse, my fire, it made it worse." "No." He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. The curse has been dormant for months because of you. It only activated tonight because I declared my intentions, because I said I wanted you as my queen." "I don't understand." "The curse knows," Aldrich said grimly. "It knows I'm falling in love with you. Really falling, not just physical attraction, and it's trying to stop me before I can complete the bond." A chill swept through Tanith. "What does that mean?" "It means the curse isn't just killing me, it's killing anything that might save me." His jaw tightened. "It's killing us." She stared at him, horror dawning. "There has to be a way to break it," she whispered. "There has to be." "There might be." His expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the fear beneath. "But it will require answers I don't have. Answers that someone has been hiding for a very long time." "Who?" Aldrich's eyes went hard, cold in a way that had nothing to do with his curse and everything to do with rage. "My father," he said, "the man who cursed me in the first place." The revelation struck Tanith like a physical blow. "Your father cursed you?" She stared at Aldrich, struggling to comprehend the words. "Your own father?" Aldrich's jaw was tight, his eyes distant. The ruined chamber smoldered around them, but neither moved to address the destruction. Some things mattered more than scorched curtains and shattered glass. "He wasn't always my father in any meaningful sense," Aldrich said quietly. "King Mordecai was a man who saw children as tools, weapons to be forged. I was his heir, which meant I was his most important weapon and his greatest potential threat. But to curse your own child, he didn't see it as a curse." Aldrich's laugh was hollow. "He saw it as protection, for the kingdom, for his legacy." He turned to face the window, staring out at the winter night. An alpha king who cannot love is an alpha king who cannot be manipulated, cannot be controlled through his heart, cannot be weakened by sentiment. Tanith rose on unsteady legs, crossing to stand beside him. That's monstrous. That's power. His voice was bitter. That's what it costs to rule. At least, that's what he believed. And your mother? What happened to her? Aldrich's expression fractured. For just a moment, the mask slipped completely, and Tanith saw the grief he'd carried for 25 years. My mother was the only person who ever truly loved me, he said. She was warm, gentle, everything my father wasn't. And when she discovered what he'd done to me, when she realized he'd cursed their infant son to never know love. He paused, struggling for composure. She tried to break it, spent years searching for a cure, and when she finally found one, when she finally had the answer, he killed her. The words fell like stones into still water. He claimed it was an accident. Aldrich's hands clenched at his sides. A fall from her horse, a tragic loss. The kingdom mourned, and no one questioned the grieving widower. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. But I was there. I saw the fear in her eyes when the guards came for her. I heard her screaming my name as they dragged her away. Tanith's heart shattered for the child he'd been, 5 years old and watching his mother murdered for trying to save him. The curse, she said carefully. You said your mother found a way to break it. Do you know what it was? No. Whatever she discovered died with her. He turned to face her, and the desperation in his eyes was raw. But someone else might know. The witch who cast the curse in the first place. She's still alive? I don't know. My father banished her after the curse was complete. Sent her to the northern wastes beyond the mountains. But if anyone knows how to break what she created, then we find her. Tanith gripped his hands, pouring her certainty into the touch. We find her. And we end this. Aldrich stared at her as if she were something miraculous. You would do that? Journey into the frozen wastes. Hunt down a witch who may be dead. All for a curse that might kill you too? I told you I was falling for you. She lifted his hand to her cheek, feeling the cold of his skin against her warmth. I meant it. Whatever it takes to break this curse, whatever it costs, I'm with you. His eyes closed. A shudder ran through his body. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Perhaps not. She smiled softly. But you have me anyway. They planned to leave at dawn. Secret. Quiet. Before the court could interfere. Before Sereni could scheme. Before anyone could stop them. But they'd underestimated how quickly enemies could move. The guards came at midnight. Tanith woke to the sound of splintering wood, her fire instinctively roaring to life in her palms. But before she could react, cold iron closed around her wrists, specially forged shackles that seemed to drink her heat, leaving her powerless. By order of Lord Regent Cresswell, the captain announced, the woman known as Tanith is hereby arrested for attempted regicide, witchcraft, and conspiracy against the crown. No! Aldrich lunged from the bed, but more guards appeared, forcing him back with crossed spears. I am your king. I command you to. His Majesty has been declared unfit to rule, the captain interrupted. The curse has clearly addled his mind. Lady Sereni's testimony confirms that this witch has been manipulating him for months. Seren. Aldrich's voice was murder. Where is she? I'll tear her throat out myself. The lady has been named temporary regent until His Majesty recovers from the witch's influence. The captain's eyes were cold, professional. She anticipated your resistance. Tanith was hauled to her feet, the iron shackles burning cold against her skin. She fought to reach her fire, but the metal seemed to create a barrier between her and her power. Whatever dark craft had forged these chains, they knew exactly what she was. Aldrich! She twisted toward him as the guards dragged her toward the door. Don't do anything foolish. Don't. I'll find you. His voice cracked with desperation. I swear it, Tanith. I'll find you. The last thing she saw before the guards forced a hood over her head was his face. Pale, terrified, reaching for her with hands that couldn't save her. Then darkness swallowed everything. The dungeon beneath the northern estate had been carved from the mountain itself. Cold stone walls wept with moisture, and torches guttered in their brackets, flames feeble and dying. And in the deepest cell, wrapped in chains that stole her warmth, Tanith waited for death. 3 days had passed, or 4. Time had lost meaning in the endless dark. They'd questioned her. Sereni herself had come, golden and glittering and cruel, demanding to know how Tanith had bewitched the king, what spells she'd used, what dark bargains she'd made. Tanith had said nothing. What was there to say? The truth, that she'd simply loved him, that her fire had responded to his ice in ways neither of them understood, would never be believed. So she stayed silent, and Sereni's frustration grew. "You'll burn tomorrow," Sereni had promised during her last visit, her beautiful face twisted with hatred. "In front of the entire court, they'll see what happens to witches who reach above their station." Tanith had almost laughed. Burn. They wanted to kill a fire witch with fire. The irony was almost poetic. But the iron chains continued to suppress her power, and without her fire, she was just a woman. A woman who would die screaming while the man she loved watched helplessly. On the 4th night? Or was it the 5th? The cell door creaked open. Tanith lifted her head, expecting more guards, more questions, more of Sereni's venom. Instead, a hooded figure slipped through the doorway, moving with practiced silence. "Who?" "Quiet." A woman's voice, old but strong. "We don't have much time." The figure knelt before her, pulling back her hood to reveal a face weathered by age and hardship. White hair hung in wild tangles around sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of storm clouds. "I know you," Tanith breathed. Something stirred in her memory, a face from dreams, from nightmares, from that terrible night in the forest when she was 7 years old. "You were there, when I was a child, when you killed the wolves hunting you?" The old woman nodded. "Yes, I was watching. I've been watching ever since." "Who are you?" "My name is Thessaly." The woman's eyes held ancient secrets. "And I'm the witch who cursed your Alpha King." Dread coiled in Tanith's stomach. "You." "I was forced." Thessaly's voice hardened. "King Mordecai didn't give me a choice. He held my daughter hostage, threatened to kill her if I didn't do exactly what he demanded." Her expression twisted with old grief. "He killed her anyway, after the curse was complete. Said he couldn't risk leaving loose ends." Horror washed through Tanith. So much death, so much cruelty. All for one man's obsession with power. "Why are you here now?" she demanded. "After all these years?" "Because you're the key." Thessaly leaned closer, her storm-gray eyes intense. "I've spent 30 years searching for a way to break what I created. The curse was designed to be unbreakable. Mordecai made sure of that. But there's a weakness. There's always a weakness. Tell me." "Fire." The word hung in the air between them. Not ordinary fire. Not magical fire conjured through spells or rituals. The curse can only be broken by wildfire, the primal flame that exists within certain bloodlines. It's the rarest gift in the world. Only 3 families have ever carried it. Tanith's chest tightened. "And You're the last." Thessaly gripped her chains with surprising strength. "The last living descendant of the Ashbourne line. Your parents weren't random wolves, child. They were the most powerful fire wielders in centuries. And when Mordecai discovered your mother was pregnant, when he realized what you might become..." The truth crashed over Tanith like a wave. "He sent wolves to kill me," she whispered, "when I was a child. Those weren't random hunters. They were his assassins." "Yes." Thessaly's expression was grim. "Mordecai feared you even then, feared what you might grow up to become. When you escaped, when you burned his assassins to ash and disappeared, he assumed you died in the wilderness." She smiled thinly. "He was wrong. But he's dead now." Aldrich was lied to." Thessaly's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Mordecai isn't dead. He's been hiding in the northern wastes, pulling strings from the shadows. And when he learned that his son had found you, that the one person capable of breaking the curse was warming the king's bed, Seren. Understanding flooded through Tanith. She's working for him. She's his niece, raised in secret, positioned in court, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Thessaly began working at the chains with a small key. Everything that's happened, your arrest, Aldrich's removal from power, it's all Mordecai's design. He can't let the curse be broken. If Aldrich learns to love, learns to feel, he becomes a threat. A king with a heart is a king who might seek vengeance for his murdered mother. The chains fell away. Tanith gasped as her fire roared back to life, flooding her veins with warmth and power. It was stronger than before, angrier, as if her captivity had compressed it into something dense and explosive. Go, Thessaly urged. Find Aldrich, break the curse, and then, her eyes hardened, burn Mordecai's legacy to the ground. Come with me. I can't. The old witch pressed something into Tanith's hand, a small vial filled with silver liquid. This will help. When the moment comes, when the curse is at its strongest, pour this into his wound. It will open a door. The rest is up to your fire. What about you? Thessaly smiled sadly. I've waited 30 years for this moment. For someone strong enough to undo my greatest sin. She cupped Tanith's face with weathered hands. Don't let my sacrifice be meaningless, child. Save your king, save the realm, and save yourself. Before Tanith could respond, shouts erupted in the corridor above. Guards, coming fast. Go! Thessaly shoved her toward a hidden passage in the wall. Follow the tunnel. It leads outside the estate. Go! Tanith ran. Behind her, she heard Thessaly's voice rising in a distraction, a challenge, drawing the guards away from the escaping prisoner. She heard steel clash against stone, heard a woman's cry cut short. She didn't look back. The tunnel was dark and narrow, carved through raw mountain stone. Tanith ran until her lungs burned, until her legs screamed for rest, until finally, she burst into the frozen night. The stars blazed overhead, cold and indifferent. The wind cut through her thin prison clothes like knives, but ahead of her, blazing with torchlight, stood the northern estate, and somewhere inside, the man she loved was waiting. Tanith closed her fist around the silver vial, feeling its strange warmth against her palm. I'm coming, she whispered into the wind. Hold on, Aldrich, I'm coming. Then she started running again. The estate was in chaos. Tanith crept through the servants' passages, following routes she'd memorized during her months as a maid. Everywhere she looked, guards rushed past, servants huddled in corners, whispering frantically. Something had happened, something beyond her escape. She grabbed a passing kitchen boy, pressing him against the wall. Flames flickered at her fingertips, and the boy's face went white with terror. The king, she demanded. Where is he? The Great Hall, the boy stammered. Lady Sereni has called an assembly. She's going to... He swallowed hard. She's going to execute him. Says the curse has driven him mad. Says he's a danger to the realm. Tanith's blood turned to ice. When? Now. The ceremony's happening now. She released him and ran. The great hall was packed when she reached the gallery overlooking the main floor. Lords and ladies filled the benches, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. Guards lined every wall, their spears gleaming in the torchlight. And at the center of the hall, chained to a pillar of black iron, was Aldrich. He looked terrible. The curse was spreading. She could see ice crystals creeping up his neck, frosting his hair, turning his lips blue. His eyes were closed, his body slumped. Only the subtle rise and fall of his chest confirmed he was still alive. On the dais above him stood Sereni, resplendent in white and gold, a crown of winter flowers adorning her golden hair. She looked every inch the queen she was trying to become. People of Velmorin, she announced, her voice carrying through the hall. "We gather here to witness a tragedy and a necessity. Our beloved Alpha King has been corrupted by dark magic. The witch who bewitched him has escaped, but her poison remains in his blood. There is no cure. There is no salvation. The kindest thing we can do is grant him a merciful end." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed grief. Others showed calculation, already thinking about what Sereni's rise to power might mean for their own positions. "The succession will pass to Lord Regent Cresswell," Serena continued, "with myself serving as his advisor until a proper heir can be determined. This is the will of the council. This is the will of the realm." She raised a ceremonial dagger, its blade gleaming with silver light. "May the gods have mercy on his—" "Stop!" Every head turned as Tanith burst from the gallery, fire exploding from her hands in brilliant cascades. She landed in the center of the hall, flames swirling around her like a living cloak, her eyes blazing gold with power she'd stopped trying to suppress. "Touch him," she snarled, "and I'll burn this hall to the ground with everyone in it." Chaos erupted. Guards charged. Lords screamed. Ladies fainted. But Tanith's fire roared outward, creating a barrier of flame that forced everyone back. The heat was tremendous, impossible, the air itself shimmering with her rage. "Seize her!" Sereni's voice was shrill. "She's the witch! Kill her!" But the guards couldn't get close. Every time one tried, the flames leaped higher, fiercer, driving them back with scorched armor and singed hair. Tanith walked toward the pillar where Aldrich hung. His eyes had opened at her appearance, and despite everything, despite the curse consuming him, he smiled. "You came back," he whispered. "I'll always come back." She reached for his chains, her fire melting through the iron like it was butter. "Hold on, just hold on a little longer." "How touching." The voice came from the shadows behind the dais. Old, cruel, familiar in ways that made Tanith's wolf howl with recognition. A figure emerged. A tall man with Aldrich's sharp features twisted by age and malice. His hair was silver, his eyes gray as winter frost, and the cold that radiated from him was nothing like Aldrich's curse. This was intentional. Chosen. A weapon honed over decades. "Father," Aldrich breathed. "My son." Mordecai descended the steps slowly, savoring the moment. "You look terrible. I warned you what would happen if you tried to love. I warned you the curse would kill you. You're supposed to be dead. Death is merely an inconvenience when you have the right allies." Mordecai's gaze shifted to Tanith, and hunger gleamed in his eyes. "The last Ashborn. I should have hunted you more carefully when you were a child, but no matter. You've delivered yourself to me. Stay back." Tanith's fire flared brighter. "One more step and I'll—" "You'll what? Burn me?" Mordecai laughed. "Child, I've spent 30 years preparing for this moment. Do you think I'd come here without protection?" He raised his hand, and cold flooded the hall. Not natural cold. Not even the cold of Aldrich's curse. This was something deeper, darker, a void that seemed to swallow heat itself. Tanith's flames guttered, flickered, died. No. She fought to rekindle them, but the cold pressed against her like a physical weight, crushing her power, smothering her fire. "No." "The Ashborn gift is powerful," Mordecai acknowledged, "but it requires heat to function. Remove the heat. Remove the fire." He smiled, cold and cruel. "I've had decades to study your bloodline's weaknesses." Tanith collapsed to her knees, shivering uncontrollably. The cold was everywhere now, inside her bones, inside her blood. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't— "Leave her alone!" Aldrich's voice cracked through the hall. He'd pulled free of the melted chains, though he could barely stand. "Your quarrel is with me, Father, not her. My quarrel is with anyone who threatens my legacy." Mordecai's expression hardened. "I gave you everything, boy. Power, a kingdom, freedom from the weakness of love, And you threw it all away for a servant girl. You gave me nothing but pain. Aldrich staggered forward, placing himself between Mordecai and Tanith. You murdered my mother, cursed me from birth, tried to kill the only person who ever made me feel alive. His voice rose with fury despite his weakness. You're no father. You're a monster. I'm a king. Mordecai's hand shot out, and ice exploded from his palm, slamming into Aldrich's chest. Aldrich screamed. The curse that had been slowly killing him suddenly accelerated. Ice raced across his body, coating his skin, freezing his blood. He collapsed beside Tanith, his body convulsing as the cold consumed him. No! Tanith crawled toward him, her frozen fingers finding his face. Aldrich, no, stay with me. Touching. Mordecai sneered. But ultimately pointless. The curse is complete now. In moments, his heart will freeze entirely. And then, dear girl, I'll deal with you. He turned away, already dismissing them both as corpses. And Tanith remembered the vial. She fumbled at her waist, her numb fingers closing around the small container Thessaly had given her. The silver liquid seemed to pulse with inner warmth, fighting against the cold that permeated everything. When the curse is at its strongest, the old witch had said, pour this into his wound. Aldrich's chest was covered in ice now, but beneath the frost, she could see where Mordecai's final attack had struck. A wound directly over his heart, dark and spreading. Tanith uncorked the vial with her teeth and poured the silver liquid directly into the wound. Light exploded. Not fire. Something older, stranger. A brilliance that seemed to exist outside normal understanding. It flooded into Aldrich's chest, and Tanith felt her power responding, rising to meet it despite the cold, despite everything. What? Mordecai whirled. What are you doing? Opening a door, Tanith whispered, and she let go of everything she'd been holding back. The fire that erupted from Tanith was nothing like anything she'd produced before. This wasn't the nervous flickering of a suppressed gift. This wasn't even the desperate blaze she'd unleashed when Aldrich had collapsed the first time. This was wildfire, primal, ancient. The pure essence of her bloodline finally unleashed after a lifetime of chains. The cold shattered. Mordecai's void magic dissolved like morning frost in summer sun. The old king staggered backward, his face contorting with disbelief as flames of every color, gold and crimson and impossible shades of violet, roared through his defenses. This isn't possible, he gasped. The cold should have... You spent 30 years preparing for my power. Tanith rose to her feet, fire cascading from her hands, her eyes, her very skin. But you prepared for what I was, not for what I've become. She turned to Aldrich, still lying on the floor, still coated in ice. But something was different now. The silver liquid had spread through his body, creating channels of light beneath his frozen skin, pathways waiting to be filled. Tanith knelt beside him and pressed her burning hands to his chest. The fire flowed. Not the desperate flood she'd used before, trying to overwhelm the curse with brute force. This was something delicate, precise. She followed the silver pathways, letting them guide her fire into every frozen corner of his body, into the ice around his heart, into the cold that had lived in his bones since birth. The curse screamed. She could feel it fighting back, a living thing clawing against her flames. It had been part of Aldrich for 30 years, had shaped him, controlled him, defined the boundaries of everything he could feel. It didn't want to die, but Tanith's fire was older than curses, older than magic. It was life itself, the primal force that had existed since the first spark in the darkness, and it would not be denied. Burn, she whispered, burn it all away. The curse shattered. Ice exploded from Aldrich's body in a crystalline burst, dissolving into vapor the moment it touched the air. The frost coating his skin melted. The blue drained from his lips, replaced by healthy color. And when his eyes opened, they were clear for the first time in his entire existence. Clear and warm and full of tears. Tanith. His voice broke on her name. He reached for her, and his hand. Gods. His hand was warm. Actually warm. I can feel it. I can feel everything. The curse is broken. She pulled him close, and they both wept. It's gone. You're free. No. Mordecai's roar shattered the moment. He raised his hands, darkness gathering between his palms, cold like nothing Tanith had ever felt radiating from his body. If I can't have an heir, I'll have no one, he snarled. If I can't control this kingdom, I'll destroy it. I'll destroy everything. The void cold exploded outward, but Aldrich was already moving. He caught the blast with his bare hands, hands that should have frozen instantly, hands that had never been able to withstand any cold. Instead, they blazed with reflected fire, the gift Tanith had poured into him now flowing through his veins alongside his own blood. What? Mordecai's eyes went wide with horror. What have you done? Given him something you never could, Tanith answered, rising beside Aldrich, her fire joining with his. Love. Real love. The kind that doesn't control or destroy or consume. The kind that burns away everything that isn't true. Together, their fire roared forward. Mordecai's cold fought back, but it was no match for their combined power. The flames engulfed him, burned through his defenses, reached the frozen heart that had never known warmth or mercy or compassion. His screams echoed through the great hall. Then silence. Where Mordecai had stood, there was nothing but ash. Ash and the faint shimmer of heat rising into the cold mountain air. Tanith swayed, exhaustion crashing over her. Using that much power had costs she was only beginning to understand. But before she could fall, Aldrich's arms were around her, holding her up, holding her close. I've got you, he murmured against her hair. I've got you. I'll always have you. Around them, the great hall slowly came back to life. Lords and ladies emerged from behind overturned benches, their faces slack with shock. Guards lowered their weapons, unsure what to do. And Serena was trying to slip away through a side door. Stop her! Aldrich's voice rang with authority. Real authority now, untainted by curse or manipulation. Guards moved to obey, seizing the would-be regent before she could escape. You can't do this, Serena spat as they dragged her forward. I'm nobility. I have rights. You conspired with a murderer to kill your king. Aldrich's expression was cold, but it was a different kind of cold now. The cold of justice, not cruelty. You'll face trial for your crimes, and you'll answer for everyone who suffered because of your ambition. They took her away, screaming protests that no one listened to. In the sudden quiet that followed, Aldrich turned to face the assembled court. He still held Tanith's hand, and he made no move to release it. The threat is ended, he announced. My father, the former king, has been destroyed. His curse has been broken, and the woman beside me is the reason any of us still breathe. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Tanith felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, the shock and fear, and reluctant awe. She is not a witch to be feared, Aldrich continued. She is an Ashborn, the last of a noble bloodline that predates this kingdom itself, and she is to be your queen. Silence. Then, slowly, a single lord dropped to one knee, then another, then more, until the entire hall had bent before them, acknowledging not just their king, but the fire wielder who had saved them all. You're certain about this? Tanith whispered, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed. They feared me. Some of them still do. Let them fear you. Aldrich lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her scarred knuckles. You're magnificent, and I'm never letting you go. He kissed her then, in front of everyone, and the fire that lived inside her rose in joy, warming the entire hall, chasing away the last remnants of cold. 6 months later, spring had come to Velmoran. Tanith stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sun rise over mountains that no longer seemed so harsh. Flowers bloomed in gardens that had been frozen for years. Children played in courtyards that had once echoed only with the boots of guards. The kingdom was healing. Slowly, imperfectly, but healing nonetheless. Arms wrapped around her from behind, and warmth, real warmth, the warmth of a man no longer cursed, enveloped her. "You're awake early," Aldrich murmured against her neck. The baby wanted to see the sunrise. His hand slid to rest on the gentle swell of her belly, and she felt his smile against her skin. "Our child will be born in summer," he said. "No curse, no cold, just love." "Just love," she agreed. It still amazed her sometimes. The distance between the ghost girl scrubbing floors in the servants' quarters and the queen standing on this balcony. The distance between suppressed fire and the gift that now flowed freely through her veins, teaching young fire-wielders at the academy she'd established. The distance between isolation and this overwhelming belonging. Thessaly would have been proud, she said quietly. They'd found the old witch's body in the dungeon, surrounded by the guards she'd fought to give Tanith time to escape. Aldrich had given her a queen's funeral, honoring the woman who'd spent 30 years trying to undo her greatest mistake. "She gave me you," Aldrich said. "I'll spend my life honoring that gift." Below them, in the courtyard, Tanith spotted familiar faces. Lady Serene's trial had ended in exile, a mercy she didn't deserve, but that Aldrich had granted anyway. "The realm has seen enough death," he'd said. "Let her live with her failure." Lord Cresswell, the former regent, had proven surprisingly valuable once freed from Serene's manipulation. He now served as head of the council, helping to rebuild systems Mordecai had corrupted. And in the academy across the courtyard, young fire-wielders were discovering gifts they'd been taught to fear. Tanith trained them herself when she could, teaching them that power wasn't something to suppress. It was something to embrace. "I was thinking about names," Aldrich said, pulling her from her thoughts. "Already? If it's a girl, I want to call her Lysara. It means one who brings light." His hand traced gentle circles on her belly. "And if it's a boy?" "Kaelin," Tanith smiled. "It means fire eternal." "Perfect." He turned her to face him, cupping her cheek with a hand that had once been so cold she'd feared touching it. "You've given me everything, Tanith, a heart that can feel, a body that knows warmth, a kingdom worth fighting for, a future I never dared imagine." "You gave me the same things." She rose on her toes to kiss him. "You saw me when I was invisible, defended me when I was defenseless, loved me when I was certain I was unlovable. You were never unlovable." His gray eyes, warm now, always warm, held hers with fierce tenderness. "You were just waiting for someone wise enough to recognize the fire inside you." She laughed, and the sound echoed across the courtyard, drawing smiles from guards and servants who had learned not to fear their queen's joy. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." He pulled her close, and their foreheads touched. Always and forever, through fire and ice and everything between. The sun continued to rise over Velmoran, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And in the arms of the king who had learned to love, the fire queen who had learned to burn freely watched the dawn of a new era, not just for them, for everyone.